As agency owners, one of our most precious assets is our time, and juggling our time to focus on those priorities that genuinely move our business forward. Now, this becomes particularly challenging when we get really busy, and often getting really busy means delivering a lot of client work. So in today's episode of the podcast, I want to talk to you about how to manage your time when you get really busy rather than just moving from one fire to the next. So that's what we're covering in today's episode, and let's get started.
Accelerate your agency's profitable growth with tools, tips, and value-added interviews with your host, agency owner and coach, Rob DaCosta.
As a business owner, managing your time effectively is crucial to ensure that you can accomplish everything that needs to get done. Now, this becomes particularly relevant when we get really busy, which usually means that we are focused on client delivery work. But if we're not careful, some of those other plates that need to keep spinning will start dropping because we are at the beck and call of our clients. So in the podcast today, I want to share with you 7 tips or strategies that you can consider to help you manage your time more effectively, even when you get super busy. So let's jump into tip number 1, which is all about prioritizing your tasks. Now, let's just kick this off by talking about the fact that there are fundamentally 3 pots of time that you need to allocate if you want to successfully run your agency and grow it in the future and not lurch from that awful feast or famine that many agencies go through. So let me first of all explain those 3 pots. So number 1 is revenue. And this is all about the client work that you have on your books this month. So this is where you're spending time doing client delivery. That's the one that everybody gets. The second pot is strategy. And strategy is simply how is your agency earning money in the future. So this is where you need to be focusing on your vision. You need to be focusing on marketing. You need to be focusing on sales. You need to be focusing on client retention and growth. And those are the things that are going to keep your agency growing and help you avoid that awful feast or famine cycle. And then the third pot is admin. And admin is all of the tasks that you do that are a cost to your business, but are like the lifeblood that keeps your business going. So this will be getting your invoicing out, doing credit control, managing your team, and anything else that you do in terms of systems and processes to ensure that your business doesn't topple over, and indeed it isn't all dependent on you. And if we don't get the split of our time between these 3 pots of revenue, strategy and admin right, then we are really going to struggle to prioritize our time and manage things when we get really busy. And indeed, we need to protect those pots. So often what happens is that we've got clients shouting at us, we're not delegating well, so we are entrenched in all the client work, and the strategy, that's the future of your agency, goes out the window, and the admin goes out the window. Now, what happens if that's the case is you're going to be very profitable in the short term, but then projects are going to come to an end, and because you haven't been doing your business development, you won't have new projects waiting in the wings to start, and that's when we lurch into famine. And another thing that's going to happen if you only focus on that revenue part is the fact that we're not going to be running our business effectively. So we're going to have issues around, for example, cash flow because we're not on top of our debts. We may not be getting invoices out on time because we're too busy servicing clients. And this not only leads us into a place of famine, but it also creates an awful lot of stress for you and other people in the agency. So it's not an advisable approach. And therefore, we need to ring fence time and protect time in our diary to focus on strategy and admin as well as revenue. Now, once you understand that and you've started to categorize the tasks that fit in those 3 pots, you next need to determine which tasks are most important and which tasks need to be done immediately and which other ones can be deferred or delegated and can wait till the future. This will help you focus on the most critical tasks first and ensure that you're not wasting time on less important ones. Now, it's really important when you're trying to determine this that you align the things that you do on a day-to-day basis with your vision and with your focus for that month, because that's the roadmap that you need to be delivering. And if you're distracted away from that because you're so embedded in client work, for example, then you are not going to be delivering your goals for that month. And you'll stand back from it eventually and realize that I've been super busy, but I've been a bit of a busy fool because I actually haven't delivered those 5 key goals that I had set for this month that will help me deliver the quarter, which will then help me deliver the year. So that's my first tip, which is that you really need to make sure you're prioritizing your tasks, not just based on he who is shouting loudest, but based on making sure you've got your split of your time right and that you're focused on delivering the goals that are identified in your monthly plan that comes out of your annual vision. So once you've prioritized your tasks, the next thing you need to do is make sure you are setting realistic goals. You need to be realistic what you can accomplish in a day or in a week and set goals accordingly. This will help you avoid that feeling of being overwhelmed, and it will make it easier to manage your time effectively and give you a sense of accomplishment because you are actually achieving what you set because you've set realistic goals. Now, Bill Gates said that we underestimate what we can do in the long term and we overestimate what we can do in the short term. And this is very true when it comes to goal setting for your day, week or month. So be really mindful of this. So that is my second piece of advice, which is to set realistic goals. And this is particularly important when you are really busy. And you can just avoid all of this. You can just throw it all out the window and just say, I've got loads of fires to focus on. I'm just going to get on and do it. So I really want to encourage you, especially when you get busy, to actually stop and do some planning. And that includes setting realistic goals, which is my tip number 2. And tip number 3 is, well, when you're setting goals, now what you need to do is create a schedule. So you want to create a schedule for yourself that includes all of the tasks that you need to accomplish, including those goals that you've set in tip 2, as well, of course, of any appointments and meetings that you have with clients or with your team. Those regular meetings are super important. They can't go out the window. So this is going to help you stay on track and ensure that you're not forgetting anything that's important. Now, if you've listened to my podcast or you've read my content for a while, you know I am a really big believer in planning, and I really like the concept that Michael Hyatt introduced of having morning and evening rituals, which means that you just start and end your day in the same way. And part of your morning and your evening ritual should be creating your schedule for the next day and making sure that when you are identifying the list of things that you need to do, that you actually assign time to each of those tasks. And really importantly, based on what Bill Gates said, you overestimate how long each task will take, because this gives you a bit of wriggle room for if tasks do actually take longer, or indeed if things happen that you couldn't possibly plan for. So for example, if I'm planning tomorrow in the evening today, I need to overestimate how long tasks will take, because there's bound to be a phone call that I couldn't have guessed was going to happen, and that phone call might take 20 minutes of my day. And if I've been really kind of lenient about how much time I'm assigning to a task, then suddenly I can be overrunning and then my to-do list goes out the window. So that is tip number 3, which is creating a schedule, overestimating how long each task will take and assigning specific tasks. So you're literally going from 9 to 9:30, I'm doing this, from 9:30 to 10:30, I'm doing that. And the other thing is that when you're working on these tasks, I don't want to make this podcast about time management, but when you're working on these tasks, try and shut out all of your other distractions so that you can just work on the task at hand. At the end of the day, the hardest thing in your day will be creating these schedules. And once you've done that and you've done it in a considered way, then you can forget everything else and just work on the next task at hand. And then before you know it, by the end of the day, you've ticked everything off, which always has to be our goal. Tip number 4 is delegate as much as you possibly can. And I think agency owners and leaders and entrepreneurs are really bad delegators. They're running these stories in their head that they believe that no one will do it as well as them, or no one will do it as quickly as them, or they haven't got time to show somebody. So if possible, delegate some of those less critical tasks to other employees or VAs or freelancers to get work off your plate. And this will free up your time to focus on those most important tasks that you've identified in the previous tips. Now, one thing to think about, and one way to work out whether you should be doing a task or whether you should be deferring it, delegating or ditching it, is to consider your notional hourly rate. And a really easy way to work this out is to take your annual revenue for the year, divide it by 1,800, which basically says you've got a 7.5 hour day and you take 4 weeks holiday a year, and that means that you've got 1,800 hours a year to work. And if you divide that by your revenue, this is going to give you the idea of your notional hourly rate, and then you need to look at tasks and judge them against that. So let's say your notional hourly rate is £120 an hour. Then filling in a spreadsheet or writing a report to a client probably isn't worth £120. So you need to use that as a judgment to say, actually, I need to delegate this. And that kind of leads me on to my fifth point, which is using technology to your advantage, because there are many tools and apps available that will help us manage our time and get things done more effectively. So think sometimes when I'm looking at my notional hourly rate, can I actually automate this task? Are there ways of doing it? And there are so many great tools out there, such as calendar appointments, to-do list apps, project management software. There's some great AI software like ChatGPT now that can help you almost like have an assistant to do your research for you before you're writing an article or recording a podcast or whatever. So use technology to your advantage. And remember, when you need to get work off your plate, one of the things you can do is delegate. Another thing you can do is defer. Another thing you can do is just ditch it altogether. But the fifth thing you can do is automate it. So do think about how technology can help you. That's my tip number 5. And then tip number 6 is a bit of a counterintuitive one, but that is to make sure that you are taking breaks. So, earlier I talked about assigning time to tasks and then just focusing on that task at hand. Then make sure you take a break and reward yourself at the end of it. So if you've got a half an hour task, just take 5 minutes to go and make a cup of tea or get some breath or walk outside the office or whatever you need to do, so that you can get some balance in your day and avoid being burnt out. I'm going to say this in the summation, but you are not Superman or Superwoman, and don't think that you can just take it all on and be a sponge for everyone else's demands, which often happens. And that's why, I've talked many times about it being lonely at the top, because everyone's looking at you for the answers. So you're not Superman or Superwoman. So you need to make sure that you are taking breaks. This will actually maintain your productivity. It won't hinder it. And on that note, kind of part of taking break is about having good boundaries, work-life balance, good boundaries with your clients, good boundaries with your staff. And remember that you don't always have to jump when a client asks you a question. Think about your service level based on the fee that they're paying, and don't always feel tempted to respond immediately. Part of the crazy world we live in is where we've got email and notifications on our phone, on our computer, everywhere. It follows us around and it's all vying for our attention. But that doesn't mean you have to respond, because you can respond. So make sure you're getting good boundaries as well. That's part of my tip number 6 around taking breaks. And the 7th tip I want to say is learn to say no. Remember, this is something else. I think Michael Hyatt said this, and I really like this quote. I use it all the time. Is remember that when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So if I say yes to doing this client call, I might be saying no to doing some business development. And if I say yes to meeting this client at 6 o'clock, I might be saying no to some family time. So really consider carefully that when I say yes to something, I'm saying no to something else. So make sure you're saying yes to the right things. Make sure that you are not taking on more work that you can handle, and make sure you say no to requests that are either outside the scope of work that the client is asking for, or you don't have time for them. Now, again, I don't want to go into this in too much detail, but there are 5 things you can say to a client when they ask you to do something. You can say, yes, of course I can do that. You can say, yes, I can do that, but not until this date. You can say, yes, I can do that, but I need to swap something else out of our agreed work plan for this month because that wasn't included. You can say, yes, I can do that, and it will cost you this much money. And the 5th point is you can say, no, I can't do that. So just remember that there are 5 ways of responding to, for example, client demands or staff demands. You don't always have to say yes or no. So just bear that in mind, that you need to learn to say no, and it's actually okay. The world won't cave in if you do say no. So as I said, to sort of summarize this week's podcast, you just need to remember that you are not Superman or Superwoman. So managing your time effectively as a business owner requires discipline, consideration, focus, and the ability to prioritize tasks. And that means that when the world gets super crazy and super busy, sometimes we just need to put the pause button on for a moment, stand back and look at all of our work in context to help us prioritize. And by following these 7 tips, hopefully it's going to help you stay on top of your workload ensure that you're making the most of your time and not leading to a feeling of being super stressed and super busy with no time to breathe. And all of what I've talked about goes out the window. So remember, when we get super busy, we almost need to be counterintuitive and just stop for a moment, put the pause button on, stand back from everything to help us prioritize before we take that pause button off and go and focus on that first task at hand. And because we've prioritized and applied these 7 tips, we can be sure that the tasks that we're going to focus on are the ones that are definitely going to move the needle and move our agency forward. So there we go, another super practical episode. I hope you found that useful. If you did, please do consider leaving a review. Make sure you subscribe, and please share this podcast with your colleagues as well. Other than that, I will see you next Thursday for the next episode of the Agency Accelerator podcast.